What'd he say?
He's good. Okay, he's recording now.
We're good to go now,
He's
Miss Holly.
recording now for you.
Okay, you all are recording. Well, I'll record also just so we have backup.
Recording in progress.
Okay. So, and then I don't know, is it possible to turn your camera on?
Give us just a couple of moments, Miss Holly. They're just getting the last couple of settings there for us. Good to go.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. No worries. And Roseanne is also on.
Good morning.
Good morning, Miss Roseanne. Welcome.
Thank you.
Here we go. There. I see you now. There we go. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, they're just going to increase our volume a little bit, Miss Holly, and we should be good to go. Thank you for your patience with us.
Yeah, no worries.
So I think we're at a point where we're good to go. I think we can hear you better now. Thank you for
Great.
for you and Miss Roseanne being willing to meet with us this morning. All of our board is able to be here, and several of our administration folks. Dr. Teef Tyler's here, and several folks from our public, community, and county government are here, and so we're looking forward to the time with you and Miss Roseanne this morning.
Great. Well, good morning to everyone, and thank you for joining us. And we are recording this so that you will be able to put this on your district website and share with the wider community that's not able to be here. I'm going to go ahead and just do 20 minutes, 25 minutes of a high-level overview of the report, just key takeaways and findings and just an overview of the main points. And then I will invite you all to ask all the questions that you have. So are you able to see the slides?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So when we did this analysis and this report, this review, if you will, we used the same methodology that we used with the wider curriculum audit, but we were more focused in what we were looking at in response to the request, which was looking at vision, accountability, and student safety indicators. So we focused in specifically on your policy and your supervisory structure and human resources approaches. And so these were the things that in a perfect system, these are the things that we would expect to find. We would expect to see clear and specific policy that really communicate forward expectations for what should be happening in decision making across the entire system. That's really important because central office and the board sets expectations, and then there need to be parameters so that all the leaders at different school sites know, okay, these are the things that I need to do, or the latitude that I have, so that they stay aligned to the overarching goals. The supervisory structure and having clear positions, that's really important because people need to know what they're responsible for so that there's accountability. If you don't have accountability, then there's no consistency. And then we also look to see, are there procedural guidelines and planning in place for implementing policy so that, again, there's consistency and alignment system-wide. And then we look to see, are the schools well kept, safe, orderly, conducive to the effective delivery of the program. And this has to do with maintaining safety for the students across the system. So for us, when it comes to having those expectations and then having clarity around procedures, we say that there are things that need to be tightly held or consistent across the entire system. And those are the things on the left. And then ideally, there are things that need some flexibility. So we say that there's a looseness to those decisions. This does not mean that those decisions are the things on the right, that those things are a free-for-all. Those things still have to align back to what is established and consistent for everybody across the system. So for this to really function effectively, those things on the left have to be specified, and they need to be specified in writing. You can have those things verbally communicated, but the danger with that is that the larger a system becomes, the more potential there is for those things to be miscommunicated or misunderstood. When they're in writing, it makes it easier for everybody to come to consensus and come to a common shared understanding of what that actually means. So those things that we say need to be consistent for everyone include what are our end goals, our mission, vision, philosophy, our goals and standards for our students and their learning. And then assessments, which is our measures for learning. You will see the same construct around decision making in the full audit as well, because this is really foundational to our work. The things on the right are those things that we say should have some latitude at the school sites, as long as they align back to what's on the left. And that includes processes, staffing, and really those things that are involved in deciding how to teach the students at each building. So there were two findings in the report, and the first finding was really focused on policy, procedures, what's in writing in the system. And so what we found is that the policies aren't sufficient. So what you have in writing to ensure consistency and accountability isn't adequate to ensure that there is consistency across the system in decisions and how buildings are doing things at individual school sites. We also found that human resources doesn't have the personnel required to manage the concerns, complaints, and investigations related to personnel issues, especially related to creating and managing an electronic system or an electronic database for personnel files and all the related information. That includes any information from incoming complaints and concerns across the entire district. So not just to central office, but also to individual school sites. And then that leads to the last part of this finding, that the district doesn't have any kind of centralized electronic system for tracking and addressing concerns or complaints from the community or at school sites. So we first looked at policy, and we evaluated your policy against 6 categories with a set of criteria for each category. And with these 6 categories, just so you know, I want to say first that the district, as far as policy goes, the district is not out of compliance. So everything that the state says that you should have for policy, you have it in place. You have a current agreement with the School Board Association. You adopt policies when things come out from your state board and the State Department of Education, or anything from the legislature. If there's a new legal requirement to have a policy, you have adopted those and they are in place. As you will see in the full audit, our expectations for policy are far more stringent and more comprehensive than what the state requires. And the biggest takeaway here is that you don't have any procedures in place related to any of these 6 categories. Your policy currently fully meets 2 of the 29 criteria that are organized under these 6 categories, and partially met 9. So basically, there were policies that met 11 or partially met 11 of the 29 criteria. The 2 weakest categories, where there were absolutely no policies that met or partially met any of the criteria, were the categories of mental health and well-being, and the category around communication, reporting, and information management. So, and that information management really has to do with having some kind of tracking system or database that's electronic, that allows you to search and connect the dots, if you will, across the system. So when it comes to receiving a complaint or a concern, either from the community or from students or staff, there really aren't any clear procedures when it's not a specific harassment complaint. And those are outlined in policy in accordance with federal requirements. But even those policies don't have any administrative procedures connected with them. And there were some weaknesses that we pointed out in what the policies outline for the processes that are involved in dealing with those complaints. Those procedures for any harassment complaints are really related to the investigation process and don't specify anything regarding follow-up. Another weakness that we saw in terms of receiving and tracking complaints was that there was nothing to assure objectivity and to control for bias in both the investigation and the follow-up processes. And then the other big takeaway that I think is that we felt was the most critical is that your communication and social media policy is out of date. And that's the one that specifies expectations for how teachers would be expected to and allowed to communicate with students. And the current policy stipulates that teachers can communicate with students via email, district email, and also personal texting and a social media platform, X, which used to be Twitter. So that policy definitely needs revised. And it was mentioned during the on-site visit that policy has not, and the handbook has not kept up with the changes in technology, which that is very true. So the second finding was really about perceptions in the community. And that was from the surveys and interviews with board members, with council members, and with principals, as well as the online survey that was administered as part of the audit. That there are real concerns and a perception in the community that there's been a lack of transparency, that the district has not communicated things clearly and in a forthright manner, and that there is a lack of trust and some concern among the community and with parents that student safety is not driving decision making. So we wanted to establish that what is in policy, what is very clear is that policy is very specific, actually in multiple places, that students should experience a safe respectful, and caring learning environment. There were strong policies in place regarding student-staff relations, that staff would be caring and respectful of students. There were some good expectations in the policy around code of conduct, that restorative practices would be emphasized, that there would be about positive interactions with students and with parents, but there was not sufficient clarity around how to ensure that's happening, nor accountability for that. Parents had a lot to say and are very concerned that leaders aren't keeping kids safe or not promoting that well-being, keeping that as number one priority. And there was just a sense, a perception among the community that transparency in decision-making has been weak. And that was related to both financial management practices as well as student safety. And so the other final takeaway from finding 2 is that communication is really critical, and that just having a strong communication platform from the district out to the community is essential. Over communicating is definitely preferred over under communicating. And there was a sense, not just from parents, but also from building leaders, that they weren't provided information that they really needed to know. And again, I emphasize these are perceptions, but these are the takeaways and the feelings and the perceptions that are prevalent among the community that came out on comments and during interviews. So these are just a few sample comments. You can see these in the report. We actually got several comments related to each one of these themes. Communication from the district level to the school level is poor. There's not a unified message, important information. So this came actually from building leaders, that important information isn't always relayed in a timely manner, that even principals are not shared important information, or board members, until after the fact, or until they hear it from somebody in the community already. And this is a challenge, right? Because you are in a community that is very, even though it's a large district, you have many schools, and large geographically, it's a tight-knit community. And as we know, with social media and with technology, people are talking, and people know things out in the community sometimes before your building leaders do. When we asked what needs improvement, the biggest thing that was cited by multiple stakeholders was communication and transparency. Those were the 2 main themes. And parents communicated that they really need to know that their students are protected and know that they're safe. And that vetting people and the process of monitoring personnel and staying on top of that is really important, that has to improve district-wide. So that leads me to our recommendation in response to these findings. Biggest part of the recommendation is policy and procedures. So you have a lot of policies in place. Most of them just need revision or tweaking to have more specific expectations and to communicate adequately what the board's expectations are, and at least establish a foundation for the procedures that need to be in place for administrators about how to receive, manage, and address complaints at any level. And so that leads to the third part of the recommendation, which is having an electronic database for managing that. That means anybody at any school site gets any kind of complaint or concern that gets tracked and entered into a centralized database without question. So principals have the security. This is actually a security measure and a safety measure for every administrator at your schools. They enter that in without question, no matter who receives it. And then they know that it's tracked at the central office, and that if there's additional follow-up required beyond what they are doing, that's monitored. And if that needs additional attention, they have that safety net. They have that backup from central office. Now, establishing, creating that database and then managing it, that needs staffing. So that means you need, and we have recommended having some additional positions at central office related to this, having a liaison for the community, having somebody that is over communications, and also personnel for managing this database. We also recommend taking some proactive steps. Some of the criteria where there were no policies related to them were actually proactive measures. So doing things and having curriculum that support students in making reports if they have a concern and how to report, and then having strong training in place for personnel when they receive any complaints or concerns, what to do and how to respond, so that there is always consistency in that process. So another aspect is just having stronger expectations for the conduct of your personnel, especially with regard to that communication platform, those communication platforms. All communication with students should be observable and transparent at all times, no matter who, any district employee communicating with students during or outside of the school day should be only communicating with a platform that the district has full access to. And if anybody's doing it outside of that, then that is a huge red flag. And then another just thought or theme throughout all of this, in all procedures, in all actions taken by anybody, any district personnel, just how to guarantee objectivity and decision-making that is free of bias. And so we recommended that if it's in any cases where that might fall into question, using outside investigators that are not employed by the district, and trying to maintain objectivity if there's a situation that could be perceived as biased, especially within the school system, because that's another issue that came up, and that's a challenge in a tight-knit community. So I will stop here, because that's it for slides. That's just the high-level overview. There's obviously a lot more information in the report, but I really wanted to give you ample time to ask questions and just respond, make some meaning of all of this. And I wanted to say too, for the larger board, that I have Dr. Roseanne Stripling here with me, who is another one of our senior lead auditors at CMSI, and she has extensive experience in human resources and superintendencies, and she's just here also as a consultant. She consulted with me on the findings and the recommendations, and is also available to answer questions.
He's getting it for me. Sorry, there's an echo in here. Okay, I would just like you to explain, because for the last 3 years, when I first came to this district, I said that we need to have a communications person, because the district that I came from, every school district that I've come from, has had a designated communication person. So can you explain the benefits to the public on what a person that's their central mission is, to provide communication to the district, what that would bring to our school system? Because I don't think that people really understood the value of that. And so can you explain that for me? Thank you.
Yes. So communication is actually huge, especially now in the digital era, where there is so much misinformation that's being communicated. And this person is not only the first person to receive all input. So you have all your school sites out across the district in a large geographic area, and things happen, and principals, people at schools know, okay, this is happening, this is a possible crisis situation. They immediately call central office, but the communications person is the person that is the filter through which any salient and important information is communicated out to the public. And you really want to get in front of any situation in if something's happening that could be perceived or twisted in some way, the communications person is responsible for getting messages out to the public so that this is what you're allowed to know, the most critical information, and it's establishing ahead of rumor and hearsay what has happened and what is fact. So it's not about spinning things, it's just about promoting transparency and having clear communication so that people know, okay, there's a site I can go to if there's a lockdown. And we actually heard these situations. If there's a lockdown because of a threat or something at a specific school, then we are told, we know what's happening because parents talk, right? And parents also have kids in multiple buildings. So they may have a child at one campus and then another campus experiences a lockdown or a crisis situation, and they find out, the other building, they're asking the principal at the other building what's happening because they can't talk to anybody at the building that's in shutdown mode, and that principal doesn't know. So with communication, you're ensuring that the critical people, you have the communication tree, they are alerted, you are going out to the community of things on the website. You also have email, texting apps that communicate to every parent simultaneously. Like if there's, even if it's something as simple as shutting down because of snow, you have direct communication to parents and who are your most important stakeholders in the district. So there's that aspect of it, but there's also, we recommended a position that not only is over communication, which is the proactive, clarifying this is what's happening. That person also is part of their proactive responsibilities is communicating directly to the press. So if there is something that happens, if there is a crisis or an issue that is a major issue, say somebody, former employee being arrested, that person is going directly to the press and saying, okay, this has happened. This is what we know. This is what we're able to share. If you need further information, we can't disclose anything. This is all that we know. Contact, this office or this office. This is a challenge, but it's super important because in this age of information and misinformation, so much of these things can't be shared, right? Because of privacy or because it's under investigation, but you need to at least share what you can. And so getting in front of it at least prevents the perception that you're trying to hide something. If the district is the last entity to weigh in on an issue, that doesn't look good. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything was being hidden, but the community perceives it as, well, why wasn't the district the first one letting us know this? Why are we finding this out from the newspaper or from a website or a Facebook page? So there's a lot to be said for proactive, positive communication coming from the district itself. It also is about managing the website, which is another aspect of that position that requires quite a bit of time. Communicating things in writing, so making sure that those are put together, following guidelines, legal guidelines, making sure you're not violating anybody's rights. And then we also considered in all of this the role of somebody at central office who is a community liaison. So part of communication is letting the community know that you have somebody that's here to listen and receive input and who can take action in response to that input. And that is another piece that is not adequate at your central office. It is not, there is no single administrator, there's no one point person who is the recipient of concerns or complaints from the public. Right now, they're being filtered through a secretary and an administrative assistant position. And there is a verbal process in place, but there's nothing in writing around, okay, so if somebody has a complaint or a concern, what happens? What is the process? It should be clear, transparent, and there are steps that anybody can see as to what happens with that information. Roseanne, what else would you add regarding the communications position?
Well, I would just want to emphasize your point of proactivity. I mean, when people don't know what's going on, they make up their own mind. They make a story. And the single point of contact for the district is absolutely critical to ensure that the story that is put out to the district is the accurate one. We know that when people share with others what the story is, that it changes multiple times. So I would just emphasize those 2 points.
I think right now, with where the district is at, with the happenings of the last 6 to 9 months, that is a full-time job right now, right? Just receiving comments. I mean, you all, and I talked to members of the county commission, there just are so many concerns and so many questions in the community, and there needs to be a platform for people to not only share, I mean, to be heard, but also a platform where they know they can get accurate, direct, and immediate information. So that really goes toward rectifying that perception of the lack of transparency. Other questions?
Holly, I just want to share with everyone here that Dr. Teefthaler and myself and Dr. Whitehead had the opportunity to meet with you prior to this. So I want everyone else on the board to have full opportunity to share questions or thoughts first, and then if there's a couple of things that don't seem to be brought out, I'll ask you those toward the end, okay?
Yeah, that sounds good. I just want to note also for the community, and since we're recording this, that currently communications has been managed as a part-time assignment or part-time responsibility of an existing administrator whose other part-time responsibilities are more than enough to be full-time responsibilities. So it's really 2 full-time positions being shared across, being shared by one person.
Okay, I'll ask you one more question. So the board, we are in charge of policy, and so you got a chance to go onto our website, right, and see where the policy is located. So it would be primarily the district office and the principals that come up with the procedure on how those, and the superintendent, the procedure on how those policies are administered. On our website, should it be a link on there that people can click on to see what that procedure is, or how do other school districts do it?
In some states, those procedures are called local policies, and so they're just added right to the policy manual. In other places, it functions in different ways, but we like the procedures to be organized so that they are linked or accessible, connected to the policy to which they pertain. You have 66 policies in the manual that specify there should be administrative procedures developed for how to implement that policy. We found only one actual procedure anywhere in the district in existence. So there have been no procedures developed formally. I think a few departments, I know HR has a flow chart that is like a procedure on how to address disciplinary issues at school sites, and every principal mentioned that because they cling to it. That's their safety net, right? That's their guideline. What do I do if I have a disciplinary concern with a staff member? It's not a procedure, but it should be, because it functions as a procedure. So those procedures are super important. They are public. They should be public. They should be linked to your board policies, which are also public. But procedures, the benefit of procedures is that they don't have to be adopted by the board. They can be changed and revised very rapidly if they're not, and they should be. But it provides that common point of conversation and discussion. What's working? What's not working? What's happened this year? And annually or more frequently if necessary, that's an opportunity for administrators to come together and have those discussions and then make those adjustments to make sure that what we're doing and how we're doing it aligns back to what the board says should be happening in alignment with those expectations. So the board says we want full transparency in all decision making. Okay, so how do we do that? I mean, that's actually huge. So the board sets those expectations and those foundational requirements for all decisions. Procedures say, okay, this is how this actually looks in what we do every day, day-to-day operations.
Okay, so the mental health and well-being, can you explain that a little bit more? Because I guess I'm not quite understanding what the expectation is that we need to set.
Right. So with mental health and well-being, what that refers to is right now where students are in crisis, or if there have been in cases in many states where there have been school shootings or children that have had serious issues, it's about proactive measures to intervene. And there's been research come out where there are certain indicators and characteristics that should be flagged. Not that every child that has these indicators is going to be a threat, but that it's just a way to be proactively monitoring kids that are having serious issues or mental health concerns. It also relates to how do we equip our students to recognize adult behaviors that are inappropriate and report them. And this is a sensitive topic. All of these things are really sensitive, right? But the whole idea around the mental health and well-being is proactive measures to equip kids to understand, even with bullying, which was another concern that was shared by a lot of parents on the survey, with bullying, with inappropriate adult activity, with even with managing their own social and emotional health, just teaching kids to be aware of things and recognizing and talking to adults, especially their parents, right? If they are experiencing something or are concerned about something at school, that they're talking to a trusted adult and talking to parents about that. And so those systems that are doing a really good job of that, there's a lot more transparency, and there are curricula in place where teachers and parents should be fully aware of what those curricula are, and be fully aware of what the goals and the expectations are. That, hey, if you feel uncomfortable in how a teacher is treating you or treating another class member, you should tell somebody and talk to them about it. Even younger children, knowing that that's okay. And so the mental health and well-being, it spans all of that. And that is something that nobody from the outside can tell you exactly what that needs to look like. That's something that you have to hammer out with your community. I will say that the biggest concern that we heard, and this was me personally sitting down with all of your principals, biggest concern that we heard is mental health issues at elementaries and middle and high school with students, not huge behaviors in terms of student to student conflict, but just internal issues that students are struggling with that are causing behaviors and disruptions in classrooms. Those are mental health issues. Your principals are struggling because they feel they need counseling and therapy for kids more than any other intervention. And the demand for that, your supply is not meeting the demand, that your counselors are maxed out. In the community, there are the counseling centers and the places that offer therapy they all have a waiting list. I mean, that's what was reported to us. And we know that nationally that's actually true in most places, that there are not enough therapists and counselors to meet the demand. Some of this maybe fallout from COVID. We don't know, but it's kind of a crisis level nationally. This isn't just a Blount County issue, but it was a huge concern raised by principals. In many places, there is, as part of the benefits package, there's something called an employee assistance program or a student assistance program in place, and that's where the district has contracted with mental health organizations to provide so many sessions of counseling or follow-up that's free typically, and that's just part of a benefits package. You don't apparently have anything in place in the district for that, so it's relying on the counselors that you have and any of the school psychologists who typically are responsible for just doing assessments for learning disabilities, but the need has exceeded what you have available for supports. So those criteria, and I cited some good websites that provide just information around school safety issues, because that's how this relates to that. There's also the idea of the curriculum around mental health and well-being, but also leadership opportunities and teaching kids just that understanding of kids being aware at especially when they get into middle school and high school, and not being afraid to report if they are experiencing something or if somebody else is, or if something is inappropriate. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you for answering my question.
Yes, Holly, along that same line, one of the things you talked about in the audit was having a designated adult, both male and female, in the schools as a key contact person for those students who may be having some issues going on within or feel threatened or whatever. Could you talk a little bit about how well that works in each schools when they're placed there?
So you either need to have that in every school or have those individuals available for the district who could travel to schools. But right now you don't have a clear reporting or complaint procedure for students, other than any adult is supposed to be a person who can receive a complaint, verbal or in writing. There's supposed to be a complaint form that you encourage complainants to fill out. There is no common form. I asked that specifically. There's no common form across the district, but in some systems they have actually trained, administrators or teachers at every school site to serve as a complaint manager, and no matter who receives the report, because it could be anybody, okay, any staff member, it needs to go to that manager who then receives it and reports it, logs it. That's really critical here. Logs it so that it's in that centralized database, and then starts the process of investigating that report. The reason that we talk about having complaint managers of both genders is so that students feel comfortable. If they feel uncomfortable reporting to one gender or the other, that they know they have somebody trusted who can follow up on that. I know that, like I said, there can be those managers at every building. They don't have, they can have their full-time position, doing what they do at the school site, but if they are a manager, they need to have extensive training in how to receive those concerns and complaints, how to interact with students, especially when it's elementaries and you have kids who are, primary age, and how to be sensitive to privacy and just all of the emotional aspects of these situations, and also to maintain objectivity and make sure that it's free of bias. And that was something that has kept me thinking. When you have a tight-knit community, it's really hard, because if somebody's making a complaint, it's about somebody that, may be a neighbor or somebody you've known for many years. And it's always difficult to remain objective in those situations. And we had people sharing, if people are talking about somebody, there's just this belief or denial that anything could be happening because I know this person. How could somebody that I know and I like or I trust be somebody who could do something inappropriate with children? And so that is the challenge always. So just having complaint managers that have been trained, and have ongoing training in what to do, how to respond. Right now, with sexual harassment complaints, the investigator is actually assigned, that role is assigned to the assistant principal, and then that report is to go to the principal, who is basically the sole decision maker in what's supposed to happen with that information. I, as a principal, would not want that responsibility. I would not want to be the only person making decisions in response to complaints of that nature, because that includes that's if it's a student making the complaint against a staff member. That's what the policy outlines. So I think really thinking through those procedures, how you receive those sensitive complaints, what to do, because then there's what happens afterwards. How are we responding to it? If there's the whole investigation process, and then we are recommending that those decisions are never made by a single individual, that you have a committee, and if necessary, those investigations be performed by people from outside the district, so that there's no perceived bias after the fact. So how you structure that could function differently than how other districts do it, but minimally every building, every school knows we have complaint managers. Even if they don't live at their building, they can come to the building. We have both genders. They investigate. They're responsible for receiving the complaint, interviewing or talking to the complainant, filling out the form, submitting the information to the database, and then following up on it, or at least taking it to the proper authorities if it's criminal, if it's not, etc. So when it's criminal, it gets taken out of the district's hands, right? And you have a great relationship with your SROs. You are using them. That we said, let's strengthen that. You're taking advantage of that currently. So, but when it's not criminal and it just needs to be investigated, then you have those procedures and you have those people who've been heavily trained.
Holly, knowing the size of our school district, what would you think would be an adequate number of staff members for HR department?
So right now you have Dr. Whitehead and then 2 specialists. We were thinking you really need, and I'm going to let Roseanne speak to this specifically, because we really believe you need at least a coordinator or another admin position who would help manage the database, because you don't have any electronic system for managing your personnel files. You have personnel files electronically, but they are scanned in, which means nothing is searchable. You have to still go in and read those files personally. You can't search for information historically. And ideally, that system would be linked with any complaints or concerns so that you can see, oh, we've had a concern related to this teacher five times over the last 3 years. You don't have an electronic way to track that and know that instantly. And today, with technology, that is I mean, it's very easy to do that, but a human being has to type that information into the database. That, you have 2,000 employees. That takes time. And that to me is the non-negotiable aspect of this, that is electronically managed and tracked. And your complaints, your investigations have exponentially increased since all of this has happened, because there's just a heightened awareness, a heightened level of concern. Dr. Whitehead, if you want to speak to that, but just the number of investigations that are ongoing and the number of concerns has gone up, and the need to manage all of this is critical. So with your current, I think I listed all the different tasks and aspects that the current personnel are managing and responsible for, but HR is your number one department for mitigating any potentially anything that could result in litigation. This is your main line of defense. Roseanne, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I do. I think, Holly, I think we go into great detail in the recommendation about the functions we've identified and the number of people that are needed in HR. But we also recommended that the district consider authorizing contracting for a position function analysis. And that's just ideally an outsider, an expert from the outside coming into the district and spending time identifying all of the necessary functions, including policy implementation and procedure implementation, that HR is charged to follow through with, to implement. And then that person organizes all of those functions into positions and identifies the qualities required or necessary for that person to fulfill those responsibilities. That's kind of a short circle of what a function analysis is. If you have someone, if you know of someone, and this could someone from the state HR association or someone from the Tennessee Department of Education might be able to help you identify someone to do this, but it would need to be somebody from outside who has an objective perspective on this and someone who has expertise in HR functions. That would be ideal. As I said, Holly recommends some specific positions in the recommendation. I would finish this just very quickly with saying that if the district's going to overstaff anywhere other than maybe in quality teachers, its positive return on investment of an adequate number of high quality HR personnel cannot be overstated. I mean, that is absolutely a good investment. And then those people should be charged with implementing at a high level of fidelity all of the policies and procedures related to HR, and then they should be held accountable. So I know that's kind of a long answer to a short question, but the number is not so specific from our perspective, but just you need to have an adequate number to fulfill the responsibilities of the HR department.
Yeah, and you're currently not staffed. I mean, everybody's pretty much maxed out. You have HR also is dealing with all the legal requirements of what you have to do to manage personnel. They are the people who are also charged overseeing and ensuring that every person you hire fills out all the adequate forms, takes all the required trainings, does all the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted. That oversight is invaluable. They are the ones who are making sure that your current personnel pool is safe and doing the trainings and doing the things that they're required to do. Everybody, I think, right now is pretty maxed out, which means who's going to start entering information into, I mean, you need to do some research and we're going to do some research also with you, but we need database to track all this information. Somebody has to start entering that information into the database. And then you need somebody that's also going to coordinate, how are we linking this with evaluations, with our complaint process, and thinking, you know, at that high level, how is this going to function? This person needs to be also working with, along with Dr. Whitehead, working with the your community liaison, your communications person. So whoever's receiving those complaints, that needs to be all tied together. I mean, this is where being cohesive and coordinated, and it has to be intentional. The district, in growing the way that it has, and in the size, but also the small, tight-knit feel of the community, there has been a reliance on verbal communication. That was very, very evident during interviews. Your principals, and even from the director, the communication was, well, we know who to call. We know who to call. We know who to call. Nobody said, well, I go to my procedure manual, except for the flow chart when there was a disciplinary issue. So the problem with the verbal communication is that, and this came up actually on the surveys, that sometimes it's not working. They're calling somebody and they're told, and that person doesn't know, and they're told to call somebody else, and then they're told to call the person that they called initially. So some of the principals have reported that, hey, this verbal thing doesn't always work. And so having that coordination and consistency across the system, you want people making decisions that align with board expectations, right? And with community expectations, which is appropriate. There has to be clarity and having those procedures in place. But for that to function, there needs to be people coordinating and making sure that people are being held accountable for what they're expected to do and how they're expected to do it. So if you don't have those written expectations and those procedures, then you can't hold people accountable for what's not in writing. That's the bottom line. And so for that information management system, that's a big deal. I mean, that should be the history in terms of all of our personnel and who we have working with our most precious clientele, which is students.
Ms. Holly, you had addressed the need for us to develop procedures across the entire district. Our policies needed to be updated. There's a few policies that need to be, that will actually be actually a new policy that we don't have in place, just in general. As we speak to those things, as the board's working in this coming year to clean up those policies or update those policies to where they need to be, you guys have given us a lot of good recommendations and resources to consider as we clean up those policies or get them up to date. And then I'm speaking to us as a group. Then we look to the director and administration team to take those and turn those into policy. And we know from what you're sharing with us, we need to develop a policy manual that goes across the district, that on a school level and administration level, we're all singing out of the same page of the hymn book when things occur or situations come up. I also wanted to ask you in that respect, you mentioned to us about background checks. And right now we do initial when we hire someone, and then we're doing them every 5 years. And I think
Right.
you had mentioned to me that was too far apart as far as spacing. There's a possibility that the Rat Back program that's new to Tennessee with the National Intelligence Agency might be a tool that would be effective for not only Tennessee, but would tell us if we have an incident where something happens out of state and we're not initially made aware of it. But could you speak to that, to the importance of that and our code of ethics to that?
Yes. So, you are at a disadvantage. So something that came up was if you have a concern about a personnel member, and even when it gets investigated, if there's nothing found and the state investigates and there's nothing found or nothing of substance or nothing that anybody will attest to in the court, then there was the sense of, well, we can't do anything about it. And that's where policies and your code of ethics and your own expectations for personnel conduct are really important. Because when you can show that, hey, there's nothing maybe against the state's expectations, but for our code of conduct, if we found you were conversing with students using any platform outside of approved district apps, then that's unacceptable, and you can lose your job over that. And incidentally, that policy is the only policy that says that, which is the communication and social media policy, social media postings. That's the only one that actually says that that disciplinary actions could result in termination. So having policies like that are actually a strength. And then what happens if background checks reveal information? What do we do with that information? So if this comes back, even with the initial background check, upon hiring, you don't have any policy. What do we do if somebody has had a DUI or has had a misdemeanor charge for, drug possession? Or, there's so many things that are not anywhere in policy or procedure where it's literally a subjective or arbitrary decision, and it shouldn't feel arbitrary. Nobody, and I know in talking with Dr. Whitehead and principals, no single administrator wants to be the one person making that decision, right? Like we want the security of knowing that how we respond to that or decide in response to that is consistent with what you as an organization and as an entity and as representatives of the community want to happen and are comfortable with. I think that's the most critical piece here. So regarding those background checks, yes, you were at a disadvantage that those were only happening every 5 years. Those were only giving you information within the state of Tennessee. And now we know that was also a serious disadvantage because things can happen outside the state. That technology is recent in terms of background checks, but now you can contract for background checks that scan, as much as possible, national data and databases. And so you can get that information. That has to be tracked and entered, right? That's another personnel demand in monitoring and taking responsibility for that information. So keeping HR, and also another thing that came up that I'll just mention, although it's tangential, is the coaches who are not certified staff members, but they are still employees of the district. Most of them, they're part-time, but those have not been under the umbrella of HR, like all certified staff members. Coaches that are not certified, who don't also have teaching responsibilities, go through the Department of Student Services, and they are not, so even though background checks do go through HR, their training and the mandatory trainings that they're supposed to do have not been tracked by HR. And in talking to the Department of Student Services, those trainings and making sure that all of those individuals complete those trainings have been left to the discretion and responsibility of building principals. And that's also not, that's not adequate. That should be for everybody, same people, HR, tracking all of that, making sure, because those trainings relate to safety things with students. So, and also, so basically, as far as the background checks go, you can do them annually. You might have some personnel that we don't need to do them annually. We'll do them every 5 years, but with others, we're going to do them annually. And that's just something that needs to be hammered out and decided as a district. and better to err on the side of safety than not.
I wanted to ask you, as we kind of seem like we're coming to a wind down point, as we look at this through the HR audit, as we read through that, it looks like we need to do a better work of mapping out job descriptions on a supervisory administrative level, who's actually responsible for what, and where we're over name badging people to do multiple things. Needs to be reconsidered. We just need to really take a hard look at that. It looks like we've got some areas that we're pretty understaffed in those categories, contrary to proper community beliefs in some ways. But actually, we're several positions like staffing wise, administrative wise, and we need to be more specific in those job roles and expectations and provide better guidance in those areas. Can you speak to that for us as we wind down?
Yes, and I know we did a pretty in-depth analysis of your job descriptions and your org structure in the curriculum audit. So I think that's important to review that as well. But yes, those job descriptions. So in terms of what you as a district per student are spending on administration, you are, I think, third from the bottom in the state. So it's difficult to do a one-to-one comparison, and this is always an area for tension, right? Because nobody wants to, we want to prioritize spending our money on what's going to benefit students the most, right? I mean, I think that should be clear from the outset. We want to prioritize spending money that is going to benefit students. Things at central office don't feel like they directly benefit students. And so that can be a challenge in helping the community understand, well, why are we spending money on these positions when that's not ultimately benefiting our kids? And so I think it's important to track, and we have this lens very strongly in place for the audit and for our process, that really any function that exists in a district, you should be able to defend it from the position of how it benefits students and student learning. You know, any position, even if it's somebody who works in a cafeteria, you know, providing food and sustenance to a child helps them be a better learner. Having safe bus drivers and safety in transportation, that gets kids to school on time. And they arrive ready to learn and not traumatized from some transportation incident, and not 20 minutes late, which denies them 20 minutes of instructional time. So really any position that exists should be tied back to how it benefits students and their learning. So that's really important. I think having those conversations and looking at other comparison districts and other places and seeing, okay, how is this structured? We do have some clear guidelines just for feasibility, that no administrator should have to supervise more than 7 to 12 people, because then that's just beyond the scope of what's reasonable if you want there to be adequate accountability. Supervision relates to holding people accountable. And we always assume positive intent, but some people may be inadvertently, because it's always been done this way, inadvertently not following procedure or not doing things in a way that aligns with board expectations. And that's a challenge when you have a culture and a way of doing things that has existed and persisted for a long time. So changing how we do things takes some real dedication, but it also requires additional supervision. So this whole idea of increasing the number of background checks, putting procedures in place, developing procedures, discussing those procedures, and then making sure we have a structure that works in managing our personnel and making sure that there is accountability for those procedures. We just can't overstate how important that is in ultimately guaranteeing the safety of children. It's not, and safe kids are kids that can learn. Marzano has said that in dealing with schools in crisis, the very first thing that has to be done is ensuring student safety. If kids don't feel safe, they cannot learn. And so making sure that physical safety is in place is paramount, and then making sure that there are strong systems for delivering student learning. And we're all about student learning. So I think those decisions, making those decisions, they can be unpopular, and that's why communicating and being fully transparent and explaining, we're managing close to 2,000 employees, part-time and full-time, and ensuring that every single one of those people is vetted and that they are vetted repeatedly, and that we have a no excuses policy with certain things, that we will not tolerate certain behaviors in any capacity, and also having policies that clarify that certain things, 3 strikes, you're out. And it doesn't matter if you're tenured or not tenured. Those things actually take time. Dismissing personnel, that was another thing that came up. Dismissing tenured personnel is definitely not impossible, but it does require a greatly increased amount of documentation. That takes time. That can be an HR responsibility. It's also shared with building leadership. I mean, honestly, one of the things that I kept thinking as I was interviewing people and reviewing it, you can't put everything on a principal's plate. There has to be some shared responsibility at central office for some of those, so that it's providing. Central office should exist to support your school sites. That's the proper functioning of the line and the staff. Central office are staff. They exist to support the line. Your schools are the line. They are doing the primary responsibilities of delivering learning and providing a safe environment for your children. So having supports for your schools and for those principals is huge. And principals need those supports. They need supports in providing mental health services. They need supports in making sure that complaints and concerns are followed up on. And really expecting them to do all of it may exceed what's reasonable for any single person. Any other questions about that? I think that's something that we can't tell you the exact balance, but it has to be discussed and hammered out.
Yes, thank you for that. Ms. Holly, you and Ms. Roseanne both had kind of alluded to, if we really apply ourselves and work collaboratively together as a board and administration, new director coming in, we could make a lot of progress in the next 12 months in cleaning up the policy and getting procedures in place and getting the personnel in the right categories that we need to begin the digital data. It looks at us again, as I was reading over this again last night, it just makes so much sense if we had a central digital database that everything's going into, and then based on people's positions and need to be access to those things, there would be authorization levels as to what degree folks are looking at when it goes into that data, as far as access to that database. But it would be paramount in being able to be able to work centrally all the way across the district that way.
It would greatly, so creating it is going to be a bear. I won't lie to you, because creating it and entering all the information is a big job. Once it's in place, using it and managing it is going to take training, but it's going to make your job so much easier, and you will have that security of being able to scan and connect historical information, especially when you have any personnel that are itinerant, that go to multiple campuses, multiple schools. So right now, you are relying on word of mouth to know if something has happened. If a teacher is at multiple buildings, if something has happened at another building, there's no way to know at the other buildings. So it just makes your job easier. And yeah, So that is probably the number one priority. But again, having the personnel to create that and manage it, and also at a sufficient level of authority where it's functioning for everybody across multiple departments. Because you're all tasked, no matter what the department is at central office, you are all tasked with supporting schools. That is the number one role of any administrator in central office. It's oversight and support and supervision, but the whole idea of supervision is for schools to make sure, hey, are you doing things the way that we want them done for our students' safety? So everybody should be working towards the same positive goal. I was thinking too, and I know I mentioned this on Monday, bad things happen, and hindsight is always 20/20. But moving forward, Blount County schools, I would expect, and I think it's reasonable, that this would be the safest district for any child in Tennessee to attend. That the results of this and the work that you all have before you, that the results could be amazing, that you could be a model, and you're not going to get it right off the bat, right? You're not going to do these things and put procedures in place, and nothing's going to work perfectly from the get-go, because we learn from our mistakes, and we learn from where things aren't serving us. And that's where you respond and refine and improve, so that ultimately Blount County Schools is the safest district for any child in Tennessee. That is my goal, and it's absolutely an achievable goal.
I'd like to reiterate a point Holly made earlier with regard to creating the database being a bear. Don't forget, though, and we discussed this on Monday at more length, there are other databases, such as those in the Tennessee Department of Education, that can populate, or you could even start with the database, one of many databases that are available, and populate those data points with existing data. You don't have to enter everything.
Some things were already reported and recorded.
Right, and you just download those data points into your database, and you continue to add to them. And you may want to you will want to add your own data points, and those will have to be entered. But then the critical point in getting the full value of that information management system is that it is a relational database, so that the person who is trained to do so can create reports that are specific to the information needed, not print out the whole ball of wax. So that's important to remember, that you can start with the data, add your data, and then the critical point is being able to interrogate those data points to get exactly what you want at any time pretty easily.
Thank you for sharing that, because that makes sense, because when you start to enter one personnel file, there's a lot of data in there. And so to be able to streamline some of that repetition would obviously a big help. Ms. Holly, you had shared with us also, as you introduced us to Ms. Roseanne, that she was going to be a part of you and CMSI. You're giving us an opportunity to be able to continue. Obviously, we can always reach out to you, but you have a lot of irons in the fire, so we can reach out to Ms. Roseanne as a collaborator and liaison with us going forward. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Sometimes it's nice to bounce some questions off people and just ask and know what's happened in other districts. But I really encourage you to talk to other districts in your state, be in contact with the State Department of Ed. What are other systems doing? Your state has things set up, because you have to report data to the state. I mean, they are managing things electronically, and as Roseanne indicated, you know, what is functioning well in other systems that they know about, and other systems that where they obviously are doing the same thing, especially some of the large systems in your state. So I think just, you know, really leveraging that experience and connection at the state level is going to benefit you, going to help you.
Okay. Anybody else have any?
And my final comment for you all, and I'm happy to still take another question, but I do want to say that there is a family feel. I mean, it's a tight-knit community, that the area, there's a real care, an ethic of caring across the district. I was very impressed with your building leaders and the work that they're trying to do. And you had parents on the survey who I think would walk in front of a bus for some of your principals and some of your teachers. We had some really positive compliments from commissioners, from parents, just about the work that is being done in many of your schools. So although it was, you know, very negative circumstances that prompted this review, you have just wonderful, caring people in your system. You really do. And it needs to be said, and we want to celebrate that, because there's also a lot of, I know there's negative, a lot of negative comments being made and negative sources of information about the system. And the vast majority of people who are currently working and serving in Blount County schools definitely care about kids. They care about kids, they're passionate about students and passionate about student learning. They just need those supports and clear systems to really maximize your productivity and maximize just the work that you are already doing. And I just want to say that as an affirmation, because I think as educators, we don't hear that enough. It is, I'm a parent of a teacher, as of two teachers actually, and it's hard work. I am a teacher. I've been a teacher. It is hard work. And so we want to affirm that and celebrate that, those people who are doing that job every day. And when something negative happens, it feels like that's all that matters. And so I want to reiterate that we heard so many really positive comments in the midst of all of these concerns and perceptions that also were shared.
Well, thank you for those final thoughts, Ms. Holly. We're very appreciative to be with you and Ms. Roseanne this morning. I think we're all in agreement that you've answered all of our questions. We appreciate the review with us, and we think we're at the conclusion. I think everyone's in agreement. Thank you both for the time this morning. We appreciate all that you and CMSI are doing for Blount County schools, and appreciate those final comments about what great teachers in schools in a district that we do have. And so thank you for that.
Yes, and thank you to all of you for your willingness to serve on the board. I'm encouraged by the work that you're doing right now and your attempt to make change to benefit the kids. So, and good luck. You know how to reach us.
Thank you. You guys take care.
Take care.
Bye.